Hello, everyone. I am Cheryl Leong. I serve on the board of Conscious Capitalism Bay Area. This is our happy hour special with Sara Razavi of Working Solutions. We are going to talk about a conscious business model, and explore what leadership is like, what this social impact model is like, and of course, if you want to type stuff into the comments, we'll be able to read it live and respond to you. If you are watching the replay of this, feel free to type in your comments as well, put in your questions. We'll respond to you even if you're watching the replay. So Sara Razavi, welcome to Conscious Capitalism Bay Area Happy Hour. How are you? Welcome. Introduce yourself a little bit more.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here, Cheryl, and for the work that you do in really raising awareness about what it means to be a conscious and conscientious leader, and in the business space as well. So I run a organization called Working Solutions CDFI. That stands for Community Development Financial Institution. It is a lending institution. CDFIs are different in their makeup. But the one I run, Working Solutions, is specifically focused on microloans for small businesses. I never thought I was going to be in this business at all. Our work is structured as a nonprofit, but I think nonprofits, it's quite a misunderstanding about that. That's not a business. It's just another way of creating a business model, though. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, I'm the CEO of Working Solutions. I've been there for almost 7.5 years, actually 7.5 years in February. I've been CEO for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I was in operations and moved into the COO role and stepped into this opportunity when the founding CEO transitioned out of the organization after being there for 20 years. So good stuff.
Yeah, you sound like an awesome person already, and I'm sure we're all excited to hear more about you. I think at Conscious Capitalism as a movement, people in our community, we often talk about higher purpose, right, as a business leader. And I'm wondering how you see this term. What is higher purpose for you? Like, tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about, as we were just kind of talking and thinking through this conversation, what higher purpose means. I think, so I was born in Iran. I was raised in an immigrant family, but specifically our family had been immigrants times before. They immigrated to America, but they had immigrated to India for some time, Pakistan for another time, generations, not just my generation or my mom's. And something we hold very close, and I believe is a true purpose, and it's been instilled, is knowing that there are a diversity of opinions and voices, and you don't know until you've walked in someone's shoe. You don't know their experience, which is something I think as immigrants you recognize well, because you have a perspective from someplace else, and no matter where you are, you know that there's another way of living, being, even if it's how you eat your breakfast, when you eat your breakfast, whatever the case might be. So for me, my personal higher self and purpose is just that consciousness that there's no one way of seeing anything. And that, for good or bad, of course, I have opinions on what might be good or bad, but that there's multiplicity, and in that is really opportunities, and so that's what I interpret as higher purpose as a person, and as a business leader, it's relaying that into your day-to-day work. That means how you manage not only the business operations but also the individuals. To know that there are different personality styles, that there's different ways of communicating with different individuals for their most effectiveness and their best selves. And knowing yourself, one of my own philosophies is, know yourself, know others, and then figure out how to communicate so that you're most effective. Because if I was working with a bunch of Saras, that'd be fun for a little bit, but we'd get pretty stuck. And similarly, if I was working with a bunch of folks who were so dissimilar from me that I couldn't communicate well, then that becomes really ineffective and disheartening. So anyway, I think all to say, multiplicity, recognizing there's different perspectives and different ways of understanding and being, has really led me personally, and it leads me in my professional life. And I think that has a lot to do with the immigrant story.
Yeah, I love hearing like that is your higher purpose, that you're harnessing the power of diversity, right? And like your emphasis on self-awareness, right? And then knowing others. And the sense that there are multiple ways of being, and that is actually valuable. And I think, at least I've noticed, and you can tell me if you've noticed it too. I've noticed that this is something that I've seen shifting in the business world, that I think in the 80s and 90s or even early 2000s, I would hear, oh, culture fit, right? You need to fit into a culture to join an organization. But now I'm hearing, hey, whoever you are, diversity is awesome. You are your culture add, right? And so sounds like your higher purpose might be related to your personal story. You talked a little bit about immigration and coming from Iran. Like, can you tell us a little bit more? Like, what is Saras Story? Tell us more about who you are and how you got here.
Sure. So born in 1979. I'm still, I guess, if an age, I don't care telling my age, but born in 1979, which is right at the cusp of when the Islamic Revolution took place in Iran. My mom and dad had us. We are twins, so I have a twin sister. But right at this crazy time in Iranian history, and it was not just the Islamic Revolution that really shook the society and communities in Iran, but it was also the Iran-Iraq War that followed right after that. And that created diaspora. And of course, Iranians had been living abroad for a very long time, but the waves of diaspora that happened from those two incidents, and then prior to that, many Iranians had left with the assumption that they would come back, but they had left to pursue higher education. So in our family alone, we've participated in those three waves of immigration from Iran. The aunts and uncles who left for their graduate degrees and never were able to come back. The individuals like my grandparents who left because they'd felt in their own way persecuted because of their beliefs. And then the third wave, which was my immediate nuclear family, who left because of opportunities lost and stifled because of 8 years of war. And so by the time we came to the States, and again, I say we sometimes because I have a twin sister, which has definitely affected my lens in life. But by the time my mom, my sister, and I came to the States, I was 10 years old and had already lived in multiple countries, but again, had a history of a family who has history of living in countries before even America, and had always held true to this idea that you are who you are by your family connection, but our responsibility as individuals is to take what is best and give the best of ourselves. And what I've appreciated about America and the American story and identity is the multiplicity. In so many countries, you have to look and be a certain way. And as a queer Iranian woman, I'm so grateful that we live in the States to be able to express that part of myself as well, openly, comfortably, have a beautiful family now of my own, and that my wife's family as well as my family are completely involved in our lives and in the lives of our family. So it's just at any rate, I think but coming to the States as an immigrant, most of the immigrants that I grew up with, and I grew up with, in fact, most everybody I knew was either first or second generation immigrants growing up in Southern California, Orange County. Not just of our family network, but where we landed, a lot of Korean American, Vietnamese American, Mexican American, and as well as Indian from various parts of India, and of course the Middle East, including ourselves. So to me, having this immigrant story and many of the people I grew up with having small businesses, including our family, as a way to really step into American mainstream, because their parents, mine included, came at a time where it was extremely hard, to your point, both in the larger business space, to step into cultures that looked very different than theirs. My mom had been a high executive in Iran and just couldn't find her footing in the States, so she ended up opening a small business and going from there. It's been interesting for me in my now professional world to tap into that and remember, wow, I grew up in a bookstore, which is my family's, or in a beauty salon, which is a family friend's, or in a music store, or in a grocery store, like all these small businesses, restaurants, oh my gosh, the restaurants that our family friends had owned. To now make that connection of that's a beautiful way in, and it's a beautiful part of the American story that I really value, of that, of just calling people in and getting them a way to start or restart their lives.
What a beautiful story of like diversity, your mother turning that story around and opening a small business. And I wonder how, just coming full circle, now you look at offering microloans to small businesses and entrepreneurs. But before we talk about that, I'm really curious, right? Having such a story, a beautiful story like this, how has this story kind of informed your leadership values or development of your values as a leader? Like tell us more about your leadership values.
Yeah, I think humility is a big part of my value system. And as a leader and as I've grown in my roles, I realize I look for that as well in who I work with and who I hire and who I feel comfortable with. In that humility comes, again, that recognition that there are different ways of looking at things because of different backgrounds, different histories, but also being humble enough to say, I don't know. I don't know what this means, and I'm willing to learn. That's a luxury that I think a lot of women and communities of color don't afford themselves, because you always have to try to fit into a space that you had such a hard time getting into anyway. So let's not call out any deficiencies. But I've learned from watching very intelligent individuals who I respect a lot. Could have been white men, as within that. But what I've appreciated about them is the comfort of just rolling into spaces and being like, yeah, I don't know that, or somebody else will tell me that, or I'll figure it out. No problem, I'll learn. And that comes, I want to project that not in at a point of like, I know everything, which can be the other flip side of that, but from a perspective of I don't know and I'm willing to learn. And so that humility, again, we can take that idea that as a leader, you're not supposed to know everything, but you're supposed to be able to make decisions well and fast. That's what I think a leader is make decisions well and fast. And you can do that by, you're in your own ways, usually by putting together a team that you like and respect and who respect you. And to be very honest with them, I can't make this decision because I don't have all the facts. I don't have all the facts because A, you haven't provided them for me, or B, I just don't even know how to look at this. So help me out. So anyway, humility and ability to say I don't know are huge values of mine.
Love that. The first time I heard a prominent like super leader say humility as a value was Obama's speech.
Oh, really?
When he he was elected, that was one of the first things he said in his speech when he's like
I didn't even
humility.
know that, but
And it
we
was
do
the
share a birthday, so I will
oh, there you go.
claim. Oh man, that would be so cool. He is, yeah, talk about humility, talk about grace, and very, very cool guy.
Yeah. So I'm really curious about something you said earlier. And you said nonprofit, profit, right, business model, like and I think for conscious capitalism as a movement, many businesses that are in this movement, one of the sort of mindset shifts, I think, or attitude shifts is that traditional ways of making profit don't have to be anymore. That the line between um, profit making and being of service, having social impact, doing good in this world, like those lines need to start merging a lot more. That these things don't have to be one thing or the other, right? But it's so powerful for you to say nonprofit business, kind of the same thing. So I want to hear more about your organization and more about that. Like, tell us more about that.
Sure. So, my undergraduate degree is sociology and theater. You know, I laugh. I hope everybody laughs. Like, what are you going to do with that? But it does, what I took away from that, and I think a lot of social studies majors, social science majors, is the ability to learn and the ability to absorb and observe. Um, and what I had thought I was going to step into was academia. I thought I was going to get into theater theory or some sort of comparative literature work. I'm happy I didn't step into academia. That takes a very special skill and fortitude. But I, I fell into the nonprofit sector because when I left college, my training was around literacy through arts programs, which was run out of Davis, and I thought it was a really cool, cool experience. It's a cool way to give back to the community. And when I came into what I actually prefer to just call the social service sector rather than the nonprofit sector, what I stepped into, I just kind of kept going in, and I ended up over time, about 10, 15, 10, 12 years at United Way of the Bay Area. Because for a minute there, I thought, oh, I'm going to get into advocacy because I just knew there was some bigger frame that I wanted to be involved with. Advocacy, I started thinking, oh, do I do an MPP, an MSW? What do I do with this? An M&A, because I was already in executive roles by pretty early on. But then I decided I wanted to do an MBA. It seemed the most transferable, also the most expensive, but the most transferable graduate degree. And I'm so glad I did. I chose a program that was very conscious of social enterprises at USF. But right away, I was pigeonholed as a nonprofit person. So even though I was starting to think about consulting and finance, they kept positioning me, well, when you go back to the nonprofit or into a consulting management agency as their nonprofit, expert, it was really frustrating because I didn't go for this very expensive degree to come back to what is perpetually an undercapitalized sector, and that's the social services sector, also known as the nonprofit. So I decided, so I found myself at a CDFI, a community development financial institution, which is at the cross sections of what I believe is business and giving back to the community. I'm so grateful to have found that space. And what I've often told people, particularly as we fund early stage and startup businesses, is to not think of these two sectors, the for-profit and nonprofit, as separately, but in fact, to use your frame based on scale and size. A very large nonprofit is very similar to a very large for-profit. A global nonprofit has more similarities with a global for profit than any of those in smaller sizes. And similarly, a small business has a lot in common with a nonprofit, a small nonprofit. The fact of the matter is, though, that the social sector is undercapitalized. So many nonprofits cannot break that basic $500,000 budget. And the reason it's undercapitalized is because your customers are not the one who are paying for your services. It's subsidized through donors and foundations and government grants, etc., which is always a clip behind, right? You have to prove that you did something. So if your needs are really above and beyond, you can't actually scale. You can't hire someone because the customer is going to pay for it. You have to like write a grant that's going to take 6 months to decide. And that, so it's always, so nonprofit leaders, social sector leaders are always working from a scarcity model because they don't know what's actually going to pan out. And so it's extremely frustrating to me. And I think many nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations, which, by the way, don't have to be profitable, and which, by the way, nonprofits actually have to be profitable. If you're not profitable at the end of your nonprofit year for that very reason that someone else is subsidizing you, they're extremely critical when you don't get into the black or net. A nonprofit cannot often show net losses, whereas a business, it's actually quite standard for a business to show net losses for a long period of time. It's always just shown as an investment period. I mean, many of our tech companies are still yet to be profitable. And yet we expect American Red Cross and United Way and many of our social services, Goodwill, to be profitable year in, year out, which then makes them inevitably think in a constricted way and not scale. At any rate, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but my point is simply that I think there is a way to reframe nonprofit as for purpose rather than not for profit. For purpose, you can create any business model for that. If you need it subsidized, great. But this bottom line lens, and for that bottom line lens to also be incorrect, it's really confusing. So anyway, kind of going on a tangent, so I'll stop there.
So I'm getting lots of great comments coming in. Looks like people are really responding to the things you're saying. And everyone loves your point, the point you're making. So if we were to just talk about working solutions, right? Like how does it work? Like tell us more about how it actually works.
How does working solutions work?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to step back first. Just again, the CDFI industry, the community development industry, financial industry, has been around for a long time. But hopefully folks are hearing more the term CDFI because we've been worked into and are often a great source of support during downturns. We were most recently in 2008 during the housing crash. A lot of real estate and those kind of housing CDFIs really stepped up to the opportunity to support rent, support commercial and other properties to really stand back up. That's on the real estate side. And now the part of the industry that's focused on small business is really coming into its full visibility because of so much of the federal and local dollars streaming through CDFIs as a way to reach the hardest to reach communities. And what I mean by hardest to reach communities is most CDFIs, not all, most CDFIs are what are called loan funds, which means they hold capital to lend out. They are not depository institutions, so they often partner with banks who take deposits and can provide multiple other products. Because they're not depository institutions, they have great partnerships with banks who have a requirement through the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA, to support what they had previously not done because of redlining. And for those who don't know what redlining is, it means when banks had not lent usually around housing, to minorities and others who were systematically discriminated against. So Congress passed the Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA, many years back, which incentivizes banks now to reinvest in those communities that they have any kind of bank presence in. So they might have a branch there, but when you look at who they're lending to, they happen to not be lending in a 5-mile radius, right? Because those people might be considered not credit worthy, read usually Black and brown communities. So they work with CDFIs like Working Solutions to make sure that they reach that impact goal, but not necessarily have to take on the risk. And especially that risk has been complicated since the 2008-2009 financial crisis, when a lot of banks became even more scrutinized under Dodd-Frank. I'm going into a lot of detail, I'm sorry.
No, this is really good.
But the CDFI industry, like Working Solutions then, is there to partner and provide loans, usually term loans, to the communities they're trying to serve. At Working Solutions, the community we're trying to serve is primarily low-income entrepreneurs. But we know there's an overlap between that population as well as communities of color and women entrepreneurs. And we also know that, you don't have to be those demographics to have limited access to finance, to capital. Part of what I was saying earlier about immigrant stories, or just any community or any individuals, even, the business you run might not be profitable enough yet. The business you run might not be, just basically profitable enough yet. So we serve a slew of types of businesses, but that's our focus. We have to, by our mission, make sure that our priority populations are the low income, communities of color, and women. We at Working Solutions, because the Bay Area is so lucky to have a concentration of CDFIs serving multiple types of communities and products, and I encourage you to look up CDFIs in the Bay Area, we decided to be most impactful to focus on an area that we felt was missing, and that was startup and early stage capital. So we provide $5,000 to $50,000 loans for individuals who don't have or have limited or bad credit profiles, so that they can build up their credit and eventually go up and ask for more capital from a lender or investor that now can see, wow, you guys have a great repayment history. You guys have been able to work with Working Solutions. We are now willing. So we call ourselves the first to believe in your business because we tend to be your first formal lender for your business.
That is incredible. And as I'm thinking, like, with you offering these loans to these businesses, right? And the history that we've gone through, right? The level of discrimination and systemic, whatever you want to call it, you offering this, to these businesses sounds like it could be like a huge turning point for so many of these business owners. And so I'm just really happy hearing about this. But help the audience understand this, like, why a microloan versus a big loan? And, I guess along those same lines, right? How can a microloan make that, the social impact that your nonprofit wants to make? Like, tell us more about that.
Sure. Well, part of it is just the numbers. Most banks, even if there weren't all the discriminatory concerns that are systematic, and even if banks are trying their hardest to move past, there's generational discrimination going on that might have limited a person's access to capital. But let's suppose even all that is set aside. Numbers-wise, in the Bay Area and in most of the country now, but in the Bay Area, the line is about 250,000. any business loan less than 250,000 is not extremely profitable for the bank. So if you're looking for anything lower than that, you will likely have to go with a non-traditional source. And so your banker will probably refer you to some other, they might say, maybe you don't want a term loan, maybe there's these other products, but you might really be looking for a term loan because a term loan gives you a fixed rate usually over a long period of time. So that keeps your monthly costs lower. And so that's why it's important to think about just loans in general as a method to build out your capacity and build out your capital versus, say, thinking about giving away your equity or, informal loans that won't build your credit profile. Why microloan? Well, especially for a startup, you may not have capacity to take on debt. So you wouldn't, even if you needed or thought you needed $200,000 in capital, it's probably not wise to borrow all that upfront in your first couple of years in business. You want to borrow little by little and continue to grow a relationship with a lender to prove your concept and then begin to step into larger capital. All of that matters on your cash flow. So if you've got cash flow to substantiate and really make the case that, I just need this money to be able to hire, to be able to get that contract, to be able to build out, that's all great, but you really have to have proof of concept there. And usually when you're a startup, it's very rare that you have that right away.
That is very informative for people. So we have a question coming in from Rise Financial Pathways, CDC. Does WSCDFI report their microloans to the major credit bureaus?
Yes, we do. We report both to personal and business credit bureaus. And that's a great question. Many microlenders don't. And they don't do that intentionally because there's this perception that there's a huge risk in microloans because you're lending to the hardest to reach populations. But we have found we have now, even through COVID, I think the latest numbers is 94% repayment rate.
Wow.
Prior to COVID, it was maybe 95. So, what we have found is you take confidence in people, you take faith, you make sure to work with them and communicate with them. And that's why we couple our loans with consulting, both at the front end so that they understand exactly why we're asking. Because something, Cheryl, you mentioned, and I want to touch on, the systematic discrimination has also led to systematic distrust from the communities we're trying to serve. Mm-hmm. So when you go when someone comes knocking on your door and says, hey, can I borrow, here's my basic business model, can I borrow about 15,000? And then you ask them for more information. They're like, you know what, forget it. I don't believe you're going to give me this money anyway. I've been turned down so many times. I'm done. We sit down with them and say, we're asking you this information because your profile tells us this, and we want to get to a yes with you. So work with us. If you don't have this information, let us give you templates to figure it out. Let us have our team work with you to input that information, because our goal is, again, that we believe in you first, and then you grow to whatever. If you want to get into equity, so in a VC and any kind of other way to capitalize your business, that's your prerogative. Or if you want to get it, into other lines of credit or other debt, but every person is going to ask you for these financial statements. Every lender, every investor is going to ask you for this information. So we want to make sure you know that, and we report that information because we're trying to build your credit profile. In fact, the way we measure success and we measure our impact by our 5-year strategic plan is to show a percentage increase in the borrowers that we work with for their credit profile increase. And I remember when we were talking, one of our board members was like, well, credit gets screwed in so many different ways. And at the time we didn't even know COVID was going to happen. But what if something like that happens and that's going to really mess up your impact metrics? It may. First of all, that's not proving true right now. But in my mind, I thought, let's just collect the data and see what the data tells us before we assume that it's going to be a disservice to the borrowers. Many CDFIs, even through this downturn, immediately turned off their reporting to credit bureaus for the very fear of they didn't want to ruin credit. I can understand that. We chose not to go that way.
Well, here's another good question coming in by Marissa Nordstrom. What are your primary criteria for determining who gets a loan?
Yeah, so we certainly look at that it has to be a business loan. So you have to be an existing, or have to have a business that's stood up. It can be pre-revenue, but ultimately we are looking for businesses. We're not going to be giving individual loans. So you have to tell us about your business, the age of business, etc. But we do look at the management and the business owners, specifically the business owner's credit profile. We do look at your credit score. It does not determine whether you get a loan from us or not. It just begins to set a profile as to how much you would qualify for. Then we look at your secondary sources of income, whether you have it or not. Again, all of these things could be a no, and you could still at least get bare minimum $5,000 from us. But it begins to build a profile for us for how much you would qualify for. So again, the fact that it is a business loan, your past credit history, and the management experience are huge factors in how we determine who gets a loan.
So we have a couple more questions coming in, but I wanted to touch on one of the most important questions that I had. And as we're talking, I'm seeing how so deeply aligned you are with Conscious Capitalism Bay Area, because I think what sets us apart from the international body of conscious capitalism is as our deep commitment to seeing diversity, equity, and inclusion as conscious capitalism, that we can't see anything about our business, we can't see profit, we can't see anything without seeing it through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I wonder, how important are these values for you in your organization, and how is it playing out? Like, tell us more about your DEI processes, your strategies.
Oh, good question, and so timely and so easy to call in. So first of all, when I came to the organization, it was a 5-person, primarily volunteer-run organization that, very white, very woman, very nonprofit standard, optics and looks of it. When I sat down with the founding CEO, Emily Gassner, who's amazing and who is only 5 years older than me, but built this organization right out of college with her mentor, Barbara Morrison, I just was blown away at what she was able to figure out. And I want to differentiate. It takes different personalities to start a business and to scale a business. I never claimed to know how to start a business, and I'm always awed by our entrepreneurs who start businesses. But you also have to know when it's time. Your season in that business has changed. You're either going to grow into it and shift your skills, or you're going to know that you need to make way for the next leader. And I'm so grateful for Emily for knowing that and providing that opportunity for me. Because when I stepped in, I said, Emily, I'll join you. And I want to step back to the history. After my MBA, I ended up kind of taking a salary similar to before my MBA. And again, for how expensive that program is, that was definitely back. I was like, oh no. But it was a leap of faith because Emily committed, and I'm so grateful we stuck to it together, to scaling the organization. And scaling the organization, and I'm coming back to the DEI, meant we had to hire individuals very intentionally who reflected the populations we were trying to serve. And when I say intentionally, it means their resumes may not look like what we thought it should look like. It means they may not, because any finance person that I've met who's a person of color, who's very good at their job, man, they rise because those larger firms need that diversity and need that optics as well. So it's very hard to find in these smaller lending institutions people who are willing to step in, who have the experience. So I felt it was our responsibility, just as I was learning, this was the first lending organization I've ever worked for, just as I was learning to teach and to bring from other suddenly I'm blanking on the other disciplines into finance and to dispel finance. And what's amazing is we have a simple enough product that we can do that. So we've pulled from policy, we've pulled from health, we've pulled from faith-based, we've pulled from all places, but on their resume, it didn't say they were a lender. We taught them that. It didn't say they were an accountant. They've learned on the job. It didn't say that they were a community development officer or a consultant, but what they've done reflects that. They've run a business, they've lived in a business, and so it was reading resumes in a different way to understand that this person has aptitude and capacity, and that's what we hire for. Now we've been able to, once we built that kind of force, we leaned on consultants, on trained, skilled consultants who I value so much, and we took what they said to us to heart. We gave them our confidence. If they said, you're doing this wrong, we didn't say, but no, it's like, you know better. Let's take your feedback and internalize it, understand it, and in about a year's time, we'll iterate, what we said. So we've worked with multiple industry consultants, and they gave us best practices. They told us what to look at, and we began to implement it. We looked at other larger CDFIs, other larger micro lenders whom we respect, and learned from them. I'm a very, very strong believer in you have to do that. You can't know everything, and history is a great teacher. So at any rate, but now we're at a different wave of suddenly we've grown an organization that people are knocking on our door, and I'm so proud of this, and saying, I've been at here and here and here. I want to now help you scale, and we're finally also bringing in a CDFI industry professionals who've worked at other CDFIs and are teaching us of like, no, this is how you do it. This is how the others have figured out. So I'm just extremely proud of our team. I think we have a diversity of voices, of experiences. And so to me, DEI means you hire first and foremost to figure out why your hiring is limited. And then once you've got some key roles filled out, referrals, man, we have built a team based on the network of our team. And I'm extremely proud to say of our almost 20 staff, we have 5 African-American identified women working for our team. We have 4 Asian American identified individuals. We have many LGBTQ identified individuals. We have Latinx individuals identified in the organization. Man, I'm just proud. And not only of our team, the diversity. We've got first generation, we've got parents, we've got, young and early in their careers, we've got seasoned individuals. I mean, diversity means a lot of different things. And that now also reflects on our board. Our board, it was so important to me that our board begins to reflect, again, the communities, not just in gender, which is very, very important to have more women on our boards, but also in the communities, the lived experience. And I don't mean necessarily clients, but immigrant communities, women and low income. You got to have access to that. You got to have access to businesses. Otherwise, it's very easy for a board to say, well, can't you run that report? Can't you do that? So unless you run a small business, you can't understand the scale. But all that aside, Cheryl, we've also recently, over the last year and a half, invested in explicit training with our team, because I wanted to make sure everyone had language for explaining their own emotions through what was going on, specifically through BLM, Black Lives Matter, and most recently through the Asian American communities, discrimination against the Asian American communities that we're experiencing. So we spent money, that's again very hard to come for nonprofit organizations, but we invested in a very, very skilled trainer over the last year. We're bringing him back to do multiple courses, mandatory courses, org-wide for our teams. And the biggest takeaway was normalizing that bias is real, was understanding that you can be racist no matter what race you are, and can be sexist no matter what sex you are, and to be able to name it when you are uncomfortable. And that's been extremely valuable, and it's been a learning experience for everybody.
You know, when you first talked about your higher purpose, and then you shared what your values were, right? Your higher purpose was around, right, diversity and harnessing the power of multiplicity. And then you talked about humility. And then I see everything that you've done for your organization, your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, it warms my heart. This is exactly the consciousness that I think our community and our movement wants to see happen. So I think you've just talked about what it means to be conscious right here, right now. And I thank you so much, Sara Razavi. Is there anything else, last words before we close up?
No, thank you for holding this space. Thank you for those who are listening now and who will be. I said no, but there is one quick thing. I think, because I'm seeing some of the comments and I'm happy to connect with folks, please go to our website and look me up. My contact is available there. But something that's important is also technology and how we democratize finance through technology. I have lots of thoughts on that. And I think, this past year proved, case in point, how technology can actually be helpful at times when we don't have that face-to-face, in-person. So anyway, I'm happy to talk through that. And technology does not necessarily mean immediately transactional. It can really be a balance of high touch, high support, but in a very efficient way. So I'm looking forward to exploring that further in the industry and with anybody else who's curious about my thoughts on that.
When you talked about recruitment and how you consider a person's lived experience, there's tech right now for recruiters that does that and create, anyway. So I get what you're saying. That tech, there's a humanizing piece to tech that could really help with accessibility and all that stuff. So anyway, thank you so much for being with us. To everybody who is watching, thank you. If you're watching the replay, continue to drop comments, ask your questions, and we will see you again next time. Thank you.